Number 8. Bay of Pigs. Cuban revolutionary and dictator Fidel Castro rose to power in 1959 during the Cold War. Knowing he had an amicable relationship with the communist Soviet leader, Nikita Khrushchev, the U.S. government was eager to help overthrow Castro any way possible. The Central Intelligence Agency, or the CIA, hatched a plot to train 1,200 Cuban exiles for an invasion into the country. The agency believed that Cuban citizens and factions of its military would support the campaign. President John F. Kennedy approved the plan in 1961. The U.S. government tried to keep the mission a secret, but it became a hot topic of conversation among Cuban exiles in Miami. Castro learned of the secret plan with plenty of time to prepare. In April of 1961, American-sponsored bombers that were painted to look like Cuban military aircrafts missed several targets. Castro's Air Force was left mostly intact, and the media soon exposed the U.S. government's support for the invasion. JFK canceled a second airstrike, but green-lighted plans for a Cuban exile force to attack Castro's military. The brigade immediately encountered heavy fire upon landing at the Bay of Pigs. 2 ships were sunk, half of the exiles' air support was shot down, and ground forces were hindered by wet equipment and a lack of ammunition. JFK sent American fighter planes to aid the failing invasion, but they arrived late and were shot down by the Cuban military. Meanwhile, Castro sent 20,000 troops toward the beach. Over 100 of the exiles were killed, and most that were left surrendered. The Bay of Pigs invasion backfired miserably and helped to solidify Castro's power. He gained support amongst Cuban citizens and throughout Latin America by accusing the Americans of being imperialist bullies. The ordeal was also a major selling point in his appeal to the Soviet Union for additional financial aid. Relations between the U.S. and Cuba remain rocky to this day. President Barack Obama attempted to restore diplomatic ties, but many of these reforms were reversed during the Trump administration. For now, the future of the relationship between the two countries remains uncertain. Number 7. The Battle of Agincourt. The 100 Years' War was a lengthy conflict between England and France that lasted from 1337 to 1453. Long story short, the war revolved mainly around disputed claims to the French throne. One of France's biggest losses came at the Battle of Agincourt in 1415. Negotiations with the French kingdom had failed to come to a resolution after several decades of relative peace, and King Henry V of England led 11,000 troops into northern France. They were exhausted and vastly outnumbered by the 20,000 French soldiers they came face to face with at Agincourt. Equipped with longbows, English archers shot arrows at the French forces as they struggled to advance across the battlefield in heavy armor. The French had grossly miscalculated the effectiveness of the English longbows. They tried to charge at the archers, but were met by a line of pointed stakes that had been put down to protect the English soldiers. By then, the French were severely weakened and fighting a losing battle. Henry ordered his men to charge at the enemy with axes and swords. They easily defeated the French, who suffered 6,000 losses compared to just 400 English casualties. The English had defeated the odds, and their victory at Agincourt and was a major stepping stone towards securing Henry V's ascension to the French throne 5 years later. Number 6. The Battle of Karanchabesh. We all know that drinking too much alcohol can lead to bad decisions, right? The Austrian army learned this lesson the hard way in 1788 by making drunken mistakes that proved fatal at the Battle of Karanchabesh. The skirmish happened during the Austro-Turkish War, also known as the Habsburg-Ottoman War, which pitted the Austrians and the Ottoman Empire against each other. At the time, the two sides were battling for control of the Danube River in what is now Romania. One night, a group of Austrian cavalrymen, or hussars, went out scouting for Ottoman soldiers. They came across a group of Romani travelers, commonly called gypsies, who offered to sell them some schnapps. The troops eagerly indulged. A short while later, some Austrian infantrymen saw that there was a party going on and demanded some alcohol. The cavalrymen who arrived there before them refused to share, and the disagreement erupted into gunfire. As the two groups shot at each other despite being from the same army, someone yelled, "Turks! Turks!" The hussars fled back towards their camp. An officer heard them coming and, assuming they were Ottoman soldiers, ordered his troops to attack them. Unable to see the approaching group under the cover of night, they complied. Over 1,000 Austrians died at the hands of their own army during the confused skirmish. The chaos worked to the advantage of the Ottomans, who easily took Karanchabesh when they arrived 2 days later. Number 5. The failed F-35. The F-35 was supposed to be the world's most advanced stealth fighter jet. It was developed to replace outdated Cold War-era fighter jets by Lockheed Martin in partnership with the US government and several other allies. The program's official website describes the F-35 as the world's most survivable and lethal fighter aircraft. It goes on to say that the project is responsible for tens of thousands of high-paying jobs throughout the globe. Sounds like a good deal, right? Well, some things sound better than they actually are, and the F-35 may just be a shining example of this. Earlier this year, Forbes reported that the project was essentially a failure. The F-35 was intended to be lightweight and affordable, but the technology that was added to the design over the years made it almost too heavy. Not only was the project self-defeating, the aircraft was proven to be unreliable. It's also high maintenance and extremely costly, with each jet costing around $100 million. This type of fighter jet is not ideal for day-to-day use, according to Air Force Chief of Staff General Charles Brown, Jr. So there's still a need for a lightweight aircraft that functions for what he calls low-end operations, which is what the F-35 was supposed to be. Simply put, the jet's designers over-equipped it in an effort to maximize its capabilities. While the F-35 is useful for some things, it's a failure in the sense that it left the military's original goal unfulfilled. Officials are currently trying to decide if and how it's possible to design and build an affordable, lightweight fighter jet. Should they repeat the same mistakes that happened with the F-35, it could amount even more time and money spent on repeating history. What do you think of these military disasters so far? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 4. Napoleon's invasion of Russia. Napoleon Bonaparte assembled the largest army in the history of warfare before invading Russia in 1812. With as many as 685,000 soldiers from all over Europe under his command, the military leader's Grande Armée was surely a formidable force. In June of that year, he led the troops through Poland and into Russia with the goal of forcing Tsar Alexander to rejoin the continental blockade of the United Kingdom. This was a trading embargo that Napoleon had enacted against the British and that Alexander had stopped cooperating with. Much to Napoleon's surprise, the Russians refused to negotiate. Instead, they pulled back and let the intruders take the city of Vilna. Meanwhile, bad weather killed many of Napoleon's troops, while others deserted to plunder and in search of food. As the summer dragged on, the Russians continued to retreat, setting fire to buildings, settlements, and crops to prevent them from falling into French hands. The Grande Armée grew increasingly weak as its soldiers suffered from disease and oppressive heat and died in battle. French forces eventually reached Moscow, only to find it burning, with most of its residents gone and little food left behind. By then, winter was approaching. Knowing his soldiers would not survive the harsh cold, Napoleon led his 100,000 surviving soldiers out of the city. Along the way, Russian forces attacked. Winter came early and food was scarce. As a result, thousands more died. Several thousand wounded soldiers were left behind. Russia, Sweden, Austria, and Prussia rejoined the British fight against the French, and in early 1814, Paris was captured. Napoleon attempted to regain power, but he soon learned that his glory days were over. Number 3. Tudberg Forest. In the year 9 AD, a Roman general named Publius Quinctilius Varus led 3 legions of soldiers into the Tudberg Forest of what is now Germany. There, they suffered what some historians consider to be Rome's greatest defeat, and in hindsight, the reasons behind this devastating blow were painfully obvious. Not only was Varus unfamiliar with the territory, he had ignored the advice of German noblemen who forewarned him of a planned uprising by his trusted advisor, Arminius. Arminius had somehow managed to secretly facilitate an alliance of Germanic tribes who had traditionally been enemies with one another. He told Varus that there was a local rebellion, which was a lie, prompting the general to take a shortcut through the Tudberg Forest to put a stop to the fictional uprising. Varus relied on Arminius to direct him through the woods. At some point, Arminius said he was going to search for Germanic troops willing to support the Roman campaign. Instead, he led his troops into a series of attacks against the Romans. An estimated 15,000 to 20,000 Roman soldiers were killed, including Varus. Others were taken for ransom or forced into slavery. Historians blame Varus' arrogance and ignorance for the defeat. Simply put, he failed to take proper precautions, like sending scouts into the forest ahead of the main force. He underestimated Arminius' capabilities, and he ignored the glaringly obvious warning signs that something really bad was about to happen. Number 2. Blackburn Buccaneer. This image shows a British combat strike aircraft being dropped off a ship and into the waves below. Known as the Blackburn Buccaneer, the plane was designed during the 1950s as a low-altitude aircraft capable of attacking Soviet ships. The aircraft was ahead of its time, and the project was kept top secret for the first few years. A Reddit user wrote that the plane in the picture was deliberately tossed into the water while filming a training video. While there's very little other information available about it, it's hard not to think that it made sense to chuck the aircraft. But why? Serious accidents began to happen while the Blackburn Buccaneer was still in its design and testing stages. In 1959, an aircraft stalled at 10,000 feet. The crew ejected shortly before it hit the ground, but sadly, they all died. Then, in 1960, a pilot became disoriented while flying the prototype. He and another crew member ejected, and thankfully, they managed to survive. After the Blackburn Buccaneer entered into service for the Royal Navy in 1962, another entire crew lost their lives when the plane stalled mid-flight. To solve the problem, the British military had a newer version designed with bigger engines. But why were so many unfortunate accidents happening? Was it cursed? The fleet fell into the hands of the Royal Air Force in 1978. Just 2 years later, however, a Blackburn Buccaneer got into another accident. The damage revealed metal fatigue problems. Many of the planes were scrapped, reducing the fleet to just 60 aircraft. When the Cold War ended, the strength of the RAF was reduced, and several Blackburn Buccaneers were forced into early retirement, with just a handful remaining in use until 1944. While the aircraft was not a complete failure, systematic design flaws claimed numerous lives during its early years. Sadly, several people tragically paid with their lives before these problems were fixed, and this definitely qualifies as a major military blunder. And number 1, Operation Barbarossa. Operation Barbarossa was the codename that the Nazis used for their invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941. Their plan was to conquer Russia before the harsh winter set in. Adolf Hitler was confident that his forces would achieve a quick victory. In June of that year, 3 million German and Axis troops invaded the Soviet Union. The Red Army was massive, but unprepared for the attack. Not only had Joseph Stalin ignored warning signs about it, his forces were poorly trained. Over 1,000 Soviet aircraft were shot down on the first day alone. In the coming days, the Germans took millions of Red Army soldiers as prisoners. Armed SS death squads, known as the Einsatzgruppen, followed behind the army and slaughtered civilians en masse. Despite their losses, the Red Army fiercely resisted, and their fighting spirit took an immense toll on the Nazis. The Soviets launched counterattacks, slowing the Germans' advance towards Moscow. Hitler ordered the military to focus on seizing other cities, giving the Red Army time to prepare for Moscow's defense. The Germans were eventually ordered to head back towards Moscow and became stuck outside of the city during Ratsputsitsa, a time of year when unpaved roads become muddy and difficult to travel on. Already in a vulnerable position, the Nazis then encountered the strengthened Red Army. The Soviets defeated the Germans with help from Siberian forces. By then, winter was approaching, and in December of 1941, the Red Army launched a counterattack, forcing the Nazis to retreat. Over 1 million German and Axis soldiers died during Operation Barbarossa, which failed its goal of forcing the Soviet Union into submission. Hitler blamed the winter weather for the failure, but experts say that the Nazis failed to plan for long distances and rough terrain while underestimating the Red Army's strength. Hitler attempted to take the Soviet Union again the following year, and he once again failed. Number 10. Soviet Amphibious Vehicle. A super bizarre amphibious vehicle was discovered just sitting abandoned in Chelyabinsk, Russia. The strange vehicle was apparently a project from the 1950s, built by engineers working at the local hydraulics factory. It almost looks like an iron tank or something out of a movie like Back to the Future, and allegedly, it can even float on water. The design of the thing is absolutely fascinating. The door to get into the strange vehicle is located where the passenger side of the windshield would normally be. It opens from the front, and you have to crawl into it. It doesn't have any other seats, just the one, and a rickety old steering wheel to drive it with. The vehicle has 8 tires, a full aluminum body, and 8 hydraulic motors, one powering each wheel. It also has 2 propellers powered by hydraulic motors for aquatic travel. Unfortunately, not much else is known about the vehicle or why it was found seemingly forgotten outside of what looks like a garage in Russia. Whether it works or not is still a total mystery. Number 9. Sunken airplane. At the bottom of Folsom Lake, California, an abandoned airplane has been found after 50 long years of total neglect. The small aircraft sits 160 feet below the surface of the water. It was discovered by a crew of curious researchers using underwater survey equipment, like a submersible camera. Based on pictures they managed to get from the bottom of the lake, the plane appears to still be completely intact. However, there is a bit of mystery surrounding why the plane was put on the bottom of the lake in the first place. Nobody knows exactly where the abandoned thing came from. As far as anyone knows, the plane likely crashed into the lake back in 1965, with all 3 of its crew members drowning along with it. However, the researchers were unable to determine if the bodies were still locked inside the cockpit. The families of the deceased individuals were contacted, and they all told the sheriff in charge that they would prefer the plane and the remains of their loved ones to stay in their final resting place. Number 8. Lost cars. A collection of rare cars worth over an estimated $1 million was recently discovered by a shocked urban explorer. Where were these limited edition cars found? In a random garage. The 37-year-old urban explorer from Winchester, London, goes by the name Ben, and he apparently knew about the mysterious garage for several years prior to exploring it. The rest of the property has been boarded up with wooden planks and overgrown by Mother Nature, and so finally, after keeping his eye on it for a while, he decided to investigate. What he found inside the garage is nothing short of astonishing. He found a 1957 Beadmore Taxi, a Bristol Bullet prototype, and a Bentley Continental Flying Spur. These cars are ancient and super pricey. They were expensive even back in the 50s. According to Ben, he had never expected to find millions of dollars worth of cars, although he should have expected to find something automotive, considering the building was once owned by an independent British car manufacturer called Bristol Cars. During the COVID lockdown, the company went bankrupt and the facility was abandoned, although judging by the state of some of these ancient vehicles, many of which are coated in decades worth of dust, they had been abandoned already for quite a long time. The newest car in the collection is the Bristol Bullet, a prototype meant to celebrate the 70th birthday of the company. But the car was never sold, and this might be the only one ever manufactured. What an awesome discovery! What's the coolest thing you've ever found in a garage? Let us know in the comments section down below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 7. Mysterious shipwreck. The mysterious 500-year-old shipwreck of the Esmeralda was discovered off the coast of Oman. The ship was once part of Vasco da Gama's fleet. Vasco was a Portuguese explorer from the 16th century. It was on his second voyage to India that the Esmeralda and the São Pedro became wrecked in a storm. Even though the ship was discovered way back in 1998 off the coast of Al Halania Island in the Arabian Sea, it wasn't until just recently that archaeologists excavated it and discovered some pretty fascinating artifacts that revealed its true identity. According to CNN, over 2,800 artifacts have now been discovered from the wreckage, with all clues pointing to this being the legendary Esmeralda. Some of the artifacts include rare Portuguese coins that were minted specifically for trading with India. And perhaps most telling of all is the bronze bell discovered, believed to be the oldest ship's bell ever lost and recovered. Number 6. Historic canoe. River guides in the Chattooga River, traveling along the border of South Carolina and Georgia, came across an ancient abandoned vehicle that dates back at least 200 to 250 years. This isn't a machine of war. It's not an airplane or a submarine. It's one of the most primitive vehicles ever made by human hands, a canoe. The river guides saw the canoe sticking out from the riverbank. After digging it from the sand and dragging it onto the shore, they realized they had a piece of history in their hands. The canoe was likely crafted in the 1700s, though it's unclear whether the canoe was made by Native Americans or European settlers. It's also not clear where the canoe came from either, since it had probably been drifting aimlessly down the river for the last 2 centuries. It's about 2 feet wide and very narrow. The vessel is extremely primitive, nothing more than the trunk of a tree that was hollowed out, probably with an iron axe. But still, it did the job. A lot of ancient canoes discovered in South Carolina were found in the Low Country, said James Spierick, the state's underwater archaeologist. Up in the mountains on the rivers, they're a little rare, he said. It's interesting to find people were using canoes on some of these wild rivers. The canoe, found below Sandy Ford between 2 major rapids on the Oconee County side of the Chattooga, had some similarities to a 1740s era boat found in the river 17 years ago. These were the first vehicles in America that allowed the settlers to slowly move across the country, collecting furs and establishing settlements. Number 5. Spaceship Ropeway. You'd think a place called the Spaceship Roadway would have something to do with the space or extraterrestrials, but the Spaceship Ropeway in Japan doesn't actually have anything to do with either. Instead, it's an aerial tramway station high up in a rural valley that overlooks the Serpentine River below. The ropeway was once part of an amusement park on the other side of the valley. The cable car station opened in the 1960s and ran for the next 40 years. But when the park closed in 2000 due to poor management, the ropeway closed as well. Now the gondolas are sitting abandoned and alone, looking like sad escape pods. The most famous abandoned gondola here is a car built in the 1980s with the name Silver written on it. The car is at the very top of the tramway, still suspended from chains and pulleys, as if waiting to take customers down into the valley. But unfortunately, the sad little gondola will never ride again. One day, it might even detach from the tramway and go tumbling down the mountain. Number 4. Abandoned tanks. There's a field filled with abandoned tanks in Zugel, Germany. The tanks look fresh, as if ready for war, but they've apparently been sitting abandoned in the field for years. There's nothing else in the area except for a dark and spooky forest and a couple of farms. The armored vehicles stand in rows with 6 tanks to a line, and they're just sitting there, with no signs warning against trespassing, and no fence to keep out curious explorers. You can actually go and climb onto these tanks, though of course, they no longer function, and you probably want to make sure you're up to date on any tetanus shots. Why are the tanks here in such a random place? Well, the field has been used as a shooting range since 1877. Soldiers learned how to shoot their guns here. Tank cannons were tested, and even Big Bertha was tested here. Hitler visited the site in 1936 to order its expansion, which required a small village to be demolished. This happened in 1942, with the creepy remains of the broken village still visible through the nearby forest. The reason the tanks haven't been moved is that even after roughly 150 years, the field is still used for military training. If you go during training, obviously, you won't be able to see the tanks, so be sure to plan your visit. Number 3. Helicopter Graveyard. There's an abandoned Air Force base in Russia with a strange collection of abandoned military helicopters slowly rusting away. Urban explorer Sergei Root took photographs of some of these decaying helicopters and posted them online, giving people a unique look at the weaponry that the Soviet Union wielded back during the Cold War. Not only did Sergei find enough abandoned helicopters to form his own squadron, he also discovered hundreds upon hundreds of abandoned fighter aircrafts just lying in ruins. Within the graveyard of dead military vehicles, there's a forgotten military academy holding the remains of a Soviet Union fighter jet, along with discarded Soviet uniforms and other pieces of equipment. The whole place has been abandoned in the truest sense of the word, with all this machinery, which was once the pride of the Soviet Union, now simply left to rot. Number 2. The Washington Bus. There's a quirky abandoned bus near Palouse Falls in Washington that has become something of a local landmark. The vehicle was once a school bus, taking kids back and forth from school, but was abandoned at some point and left beside Route 260. After so much time on the side of the road, it became a beloved piece of the community. Artists tagged the bus up with colorful and tasteful graffiti, even writing the word Wonderland on the side. It looks pretty cool. There was recently a battle between the local residents and the Washington Department of Natural Resources to keep the bus on the side of the road where it belongs. According to Leanne Blankenship, the president of the local historical museum board, the bus hasn't moved in at least 30 years. The issue is that the bus is sitting on the department's land, so they are technically liable if something bad happens to a person visiting the bus. Unfortunately, the guys in charge decided to get rid of the school bus and throw it in the trash. A local landmark for 30 years will just be tossed in the garbage. What a bummer. One of the reasons the bus had been so interesting is that nobody knows who abandoned the bus in the first place, where it came from, or how it managed to stay there for so long without someone taking it. And number 1, the Orient Express. The Orient Express is definitely the most famous named among trains. It was a glorious way to travel back in the early 1900s, when trains were all the rage. Even today, it's considered the most iconic train in history. But sadly, the Orient Express days of glory are over. There is even a train car that was once part of this legendary route abandoned and rusted, sitting on the tracks in Belgium. The train car was left here by the National Railway Company in the country many years ago when they thought about building a railway museum. The museum was never built though, and the train was never moved. Within the train, there are still traces of luxury, like the plush interior of the carriages, the fine detail in the wood carvings, and the extra-large seats for maximum comfort. But even though we all talk about the Orient Express as if it's gone, dead, and extinct, the train does still run from Paris to Istanbul. It never stopped. It just became significantly less popular. The original route for the Orient Express moved through much of Europe, from Paris to Munich, then from Vienna to Budapest, Budapest to Bucharest, and the final stop in Istanbul. It went from the west coast of Europe to where Europe meets Asia. The lonely car abandoned in Belgium is just one of the many no longer in service. The posh carriages of old have been replaced with modern, less extravagant ones. Number 11. Submarine in the desert? In 2013, this image of an alleged Russian submarine sitting on dry, cracked mud in a desert began circulating on social media. Snopes investigated the claims and found that the photo was actually a composite of 2 images. One picture, which featured a barren landscape with no submarine, was traced to Michael Hall, a photographer for Getty Images. Hall also took the photo of the submarine, and he was also the person responsible for combining it with the landscape image. So, is there really a submarine stranded in the desert? We didn't find any evidence of one, but there is a place where you'll encounter a seemingly out-of-place ghost fleet of ships rusting in the sand. The border along modern-day Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan was once home to the world's 4th largest sea, known as the Aral Sea. Several fish communities thrived here. During the 1960s, the Soviet Union implemented several irrigation projects, which drastically reduced the sea's inflow. Water levels dropped dramatically as a result, and the remaining body of water is sadly just 10% of its original size. Most of the former sea has turned into a dusty, barren desert wasteland. As the Aral Sea disappeared and became the Aralkum Desert, fish began to die. Unemployment rose, and residents moved away in search of better opportunities. The boats they left behind are still sitting in place at the sea's former harbors. Nearby, there are derelict buildings, serving as an eerie reminder that the landscape was once abundant with life, a stark contrast to the ghostly sight that remains today. This depressing view may change, however. A growing effort to revive the Aral Sea could see the boats re-submerged in the future. And with any luck, maybe seaside communities will reappear. Number 10. An abandoned crashed Jeep. On June 23rd of this year, a 24-year-old field geologist named Daniel Robinson got into his Jeep and drove away from his remote job site in Buckeye, Arizona. He didn't tell anyone where he was going or why he was leaving. He just started heading further into the Sonoran Desert. Daniel has not been seen or heard from since. Nearly a month later, a rancher discovered Daniel's abandoned Jeep on a property 4 miles from his job site. The vehicle had rolled and crash-landed on its side in a ravine. The airbags were deployed, the driver's side window was busted, and the front windshield was cracked. Evidence indicates that Daniel was wearing his seatbelt when the accident occurred. The young man's clothing, cell phone, wallet, and keys were found at the scene. An extensive police search using helicopters, cadaver dogs, and tracking canines proved fruitless. Foot searches organized by Daniel's dad, David, have been equally unsuccessful. Daniel has a history of always telling his loved ones about his travel plans. His disappearance is extremely out of character, according to a crowdfunding campaign raising money for search efforts. Police do not suspect foul play, but the family has accused them of not performing any forensic tests to rule it out. They have vowed to continue searching for Daniel until they find out exactly where he is and what happened to him. Number 9. A plant that lives for thousands of years. The Namib Desert in southern Africa is one of the world's oldest and driest deserts, and it's home to one of the world's longest living plants, dubbed Welwitschia. This strange species has just 2 leaves, which can grow for thousands of years. According to the New York Times, the oldest specimens are thought to be at least 3,000 years, dating back to the beginning of the Iron Age. A recent study examining the Welwitschia genome sought to explain how the plant lives for such a long time. Researchers found that the genome doubled around 86 million years ago, after a mistake happened during the cell division process. At the time, the region was undergoing an especially dry period. Extreme conditions like this are often associated with genome duplication, according to lead study author Tao Wan. This resulted in what study co-author Andrew Leach described as a lot of junk DNA called retrotransposons. Even worse, the expanded genome demanded a lot of extra energy from the plant to maintain life. Then, between 1 and 2 million years ago, the plant responded to increasingly harsh conditions by silencing its retrotransposons through a process called methylation. This decreased the amount of energy needed for Welwitschia to stay alive, even with its large genome. Plant biologist Jim Liebens-Mack told the New York Times that he thinks the bizarre plant's genetic resilience could possibly provide useful information for improving agriculture. What do you think? Number 8. A cave full of bones. Over 10 years ago, scientists found an underground cave full of remarkably preserved human bones in the Saudi Arabian desert. The remote site, known as Jersan, contained both human and animal remains. Experts recently ventured back into the mysterious cave to investigate. They determined that the striped hyenas accumulated the pile of remains roughly 7,000 years ago when they took their food into their lair to eat. Hyenas are known for their bone-collecting activities, as well as their tendency to ferociously consume their findings, including parts of the skeleton. The catch of bones found at Jersan consisted of at least 14 species, including camels, donkeys, goats, and horses, as well as fragments from at least 2 human skulls. You may be surprised to learn that hyena bones were also found, indicating that the species doesn't hesitate to turn into cannibals when necessary. Researchers cited the findings as potentially valuable for learning more about what types of animals ancient humans may have raised in the region. They plan to investigate similar sites in hopes of finding out more about our ancestors' daily lives. Number 7. A desert city. Kolmanskop is arguably one of the eeriest abandoned towns a thrill seeker or an urban explorer could check out. Located in the Namib Desert of South Africa, it's filled with old houses and businesses that were simply left as is before the unforgiving desert sand took over. The town's history dates back to 1908, when a Namibian railway worker named Zacharias Liwala discovered diamonds in the vicinity. Hopeful prospectors came running from Germany, and by 1912, a functional town was established. At one point, nearly 12% of the world's diamond production occurred at Kolmanskop. The settlement quickly became wealthy, and soon enough, Kolmanskop's high-maintenance residents had access to a butcher, baker, post office, ice factory, and more. They had the luxury of living in one of the world's harshest climates without sacrificing many of the cozy comforts they were used to, with fresh water delivered by train. And when these eccentric, well-off types demanded an entertainment industry, European opera groups traveled to the far-flung site and performed. But the Diamond's Town glory was short-lived. Just 4 years after Kolmanskop was founded, it faced a rebellion from the local indigenous Herero people. The German colonizers won in an immediate sense, but the uprising symbolized the beginning of the end for them. Overmining ultimately triggered the downfall of Kolmanskop, and by the 1930s, it was completely depleted of the natural resources that made its residents so wealthy. By 1956, the town was abandoned entirely. Tourists began visiting Kolmanskop in 2002. Today, roughly 35,000 people travel there every year. Despite conservation efforts, however, studies show that the historic site is unavoidably deteriorating, and unless something is done to preserve the town's crumbling structures, they will eventually vanish. Would you like to visit the abandoned town of Kolmanskop? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button if you haven't already. Number 6. secret military base. Google Earth and other aerial imaging programs have led to some pretty shocking discoveries by ordinary people, right from their living rooms. This was recently the case when one internet user found what they believed was a secret military base in Er Roy, Niger, near the Libyan border. The site is in a remote part of the Sahara Desert and appears to consist of several buildings, vehicles, a landing strip, a fence surrounding the property's perimeter, and what looks like several landmines. Lad Bible investigated the matter after the person who noticed the site posted an image to Reddit. The team found that the site is, in fact, an active military base, although it's not necessarily a secret. Known as Aerodrome Madama, the property functions as a French military base, and there are around 100 Niger military soldiers stationed there. It was built in 1931 at the site of a former colonial fort and functions today as a border post that monitors travel between Niger and Libya. While the eagle-eyed Google Maps enthusiast was mistaken for thinking the base is a secret, they were right about it being surrounded by landmines and a fence. And to the person's credit, their suspicions were more on point than some of the other alleged sightings people have made based on satellite imagery. Number 5. Portal to an alien planet. Google Earth strikes again. A Google Maps user recently claimed that they found a so-called green portal to another planet while pursuing images of the Nazca Lines in Peru. They took to Reddit, of course, with a shocking sight where commenters discussed the possibility of the strange neon green circle representing a connection to an alien world, or perhaps even to ancient extraterrestrials. The fact that the bizarre dot was spotted near the Nazca Lines only fueled these types of speculations. There are around 1,000 known geoglyphs of animals, geometric shapes, and humanoid characters etched into the floor of the Nazca Desert. Experts believe that they were created between 500 BC and 500 AD. These massive carvings are so large, they can generally only be identified from overhead, and their purpose remains a mystery to this day. The recent discovered green marking is equally curious. As far-flung as many people's explanations for it were, there were some that actually made logical sense. For instance, one Reddit user suggested that something reflective hit the camera, creating the illusion of something far stranger than it really is. In other words, a photography glitch. Whatever the case, nobody seems to know for sure exactly what featured in this mystifying image. Do you have any ideas? Number 4. An abandoned movie set. At a remote desert site several hours from the Qatari capital of Doha, there appears to be a deserted, ancient-looking Bedouin-style village. The exact reason for its presence are somewhat of a mystery, but it's commonly believed that the site is an abandoned film set that was built for a TV series or movie. At the site, visitors will find tall, slender towers called minarets, a mosque, and a mud brick house with wooden doors, nicknamed Film City. It was once a fishing village, according to Adriana Paramau, writing for Afar. The city was reportedly abandoned during the 1970s. Then in 2009, it was partially rebuilt for filming purposes, depending on who you ask. There are several different stories about the site's history, but nobody seems to know its exact history. The apocalyptic nature of the deserted site is creepy enough on its own, but it gets even eerier when one observes the vast, seemingly limitless desert that surrounds the film city. Visitors are unlikely to encounter other people or even passing traffic, and typically only cross paths with the guard who keeps watch over the site. Just to get there, you'll need a four-wheel drive vehicle, serving as an ever-present reminder that you're venturing deep into the middle of nowhere. Are you up for it? Number 3. Train Graveyard. Bolivia's vast barren Salar de Uyuni salt flats are absolutely memorizing. Simply put, it's the last place you'd expect to see a train graveyard, but that's exactly what you'll encounter less than 2 miles from the region's modern-day train station, at a site known as the Great Train Graveyard, or Cementerio de Trenes. The site is chock full of rotting and rusted locomotives and train cars. But why? During the 19th century, plans were made to expand the region's railroad network, but the mining industry began to decline, and the project's planners encountered technical difficulties and negotiational issues with the countries they hoped to link the train lines to. Consequently, the plans were abandoned, and over 100 trains were simply left behind at the site, where they still remain to this day. The cars are heavily corroded due to the salty winds that blow through the area, and they've also been vandalized. But the decaying site is open to visitors, and for those wishing to visit the world's largest salt flat and perhaps stay in a hotel made out of salt, a stop here may be worthwhile. Number 2. A strange monolith. Late last year, 3 mysterious monoliths appeared in Utah, California, and Romania within a few weeks' span. The first sighting happened in the Utah desert in late November, while helicopter crews and wildlife biologists counted bighorn sheep from overhead. They noticed an 11-foot-tall stainless steel object with a mirrored surface that was conspicuously out of place. Nobody knows who created the monument. 4 identified men were reportedly seen dismantling it and walking away with the pieces. They allegedly told an onlooker that they were disposing of trash, and their association with the sculpture, if any, remains a mystery. Days later, a 13-foot-tall triangular monolith appeared on a hill in the Romanian town of Piatra Neamț. Not long after that, another strange structure measuring 10 feet tall sprang up on Pine Mountain in Atascadero, California. Some people speculated that the monuments were inspired by a storyline from the science fiction novel 2001: A Space Odyssey. In the story, a monolith appears on planet Earth and gives wisdom to a tribe of apes, but a solid explanation for these cryptic structures was never established, leaving us to wonder and speculate until, or unless, more clues surface. And number 1. The largest drawing ever made? India's Thar Desert is home to a collection of old, mysterious drawings etched into the sand. These geoglyphs are so massive, there's no way the people who carved them at ground level saw them in their entirety. Known as the Thar Desert Formations, they may be the largest known geoglyphs ever created. The largest image resembles a giant spiral and consists of a single looping line measuring over 7.5 miles. It occupies an area of 2,375 feet by 722 feet. The second largest geoglyph appears to be a serpent, and it's made from a 6.8-mile-long line. There are several other smaller geoglyphs throughout the region too. Independent researchers Carlo and Johann Othheimer discovered the artwork using Google Earth to survey the region. A closer look revealed that some of the lines were dug for planting trees, but others remained unexplained, leaving the possibility that they were created by ancient people. Some researchers think they're less old and were made as recently as 150 years ago. The geoglyphs may be connected to some Hindu monuments in the area, but nobody knows who created them, so their meaning and use is a complete mystery. Thanks for watching. Have you ever found anything strange in the desert? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed today's video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. We'll see you next time.